Blind love. A timid young woman is forced to marry her sister's blind millionaire fiancé, but in that darkness, something unexpected begins to bloom, a love that dares to grow beyond lies and judgment. Do you believe that sometimes not seeing is the only way to truly see? Down the aisle now. Immediately. No one asked if she agreed. Her mother gripped Valeria's wrist, dragging her toward the wedding dress that hung like a glittering trap. Her hand was ice cold, but her voice cut through the air with fury. Celeste isn't coming. You have no choice. Walk down that aisle now. Immediately. The tiny dressing room seemed to cave in on itself, the scent of expensive perfume, the clack of heels, whispered orders from assistants, and the frantic knocking from the wedding coordinator. All of it hammered against her skull. Valeria said nothing, not because she agreed, but because her throat had closed under the weight of her mother's glare. If this wedding falls apart, we'll all be begging in the streets. Your sister can't marry him, so you will. You owe me that. Her mother's voice was sharp as a blade. And Celeste, her sister, stood at the door, arms crossed, face cold as stone. She offered only one sentence, dripping with contempt. You always dreamed of being the bride, didn't you? Then play the part to the end. No one asked Valeria what she wanted. No one cared how she felt. The decision had already been made. The dress was steamed, her name had replaced Celeste's on the marriage license, and the groom, the blind man waiting beneath 100 watching eyes, was still standing at the end of the aisle. Lucian Drake, blind, wealthy, proud. Hand-picked by her family as a financial windfall, a man too valuable to resist, too blind to see the deception. For the past 6 months, Valeria had spoken to him over the phone under the name Celeste, her voice trained daily, her tone, her laugh, even her perfume all rehearsed until perfect because, as her mother once said, Celeste doesn't have time for sentimental nonsense. And now she was about to marry him in a wedding broadcast live beneath candlelight and stained glass at St. Vincent's Cathedral, in front of the press, the elite, and a groom who couldn't see but who could feel everything. She walked the aisle like someone stepping into an abyss. The gown had been shoved onto her in 10 minutes, her makeup done in 6, her shoes crammed on just as the wedding car pulled up. Lucien stood like a statue, face serene, posture impossibly firm. His blind eyes were half closed, head tilted slightly as if listening. No one knew what he was thinking. No one knew if he could sense the switch. The minister asked, Valeria Quinn, do you take Lucian Drake to be your lawful husband, in honor, in love, and in duty, until death do you part? The air turned to ice. Valeria didn't dare look up. In the distance, she saw her mother nod once, saw Celeste's smirk curl at the corner of her mouth. I. Her voice cracked. I do. Lucien tilted his head. He didn't speak right away, then, almost instinctively, he turned toward her, his voice low, why are you shaking? Are you afraid I'll see you? For one fleeting second, Valeria knew he wasn't joking. He had felt something. When the thunderous applause erupted, Valeria knew she'd gone too far to turn back. She smiled, not out of joy, but because the camera was zooming in and Celeste was watching from the back row, wearing the smug expression of someone who had just won a cruel bet. Valeria told herself it would only take a day, just enough time to fool the crowd, sign some papers, and disappear from the life of a man she wasn't meant to marry, as if she had never existed. But those words echoed in her mind like a bad line from a poorly written role. They didn't convince her. They didn't soothe the tightness in her throat. The cold ring on her finger still felt new, and before she could even register the weight of her own hand, she was already in the car, sitting beside her legal husband, a man she'd never seen but whose every breath she had memorized. As the doors shut behind them, Valeria glanced over her shoulder. St. Vincent's Cathedral was now just a faded smear of light behind tinted glass. Ahead of them was darkness, and in that darkness, Lucien didn't need eyes to know she was trembling. The Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled away slowly, gliding through quiet, dimly lit streets toward the Drake estate tucked away in the northern outskirts of the city. Lucien sat straight, hands interlaced, eyes closed as if sleeping, but Valeria knew better. He wasn't sleeping, he was listening, not to the world outside but to her breathing, the rustle of silk, the soft tap of her shoe against the floor. He was recording it all, like composing a silent symphony in his mind. She stayed silent, trying to breathe evenly. In her head, images of her mother and Celeste loomed, faces tight with satisfaction, eyes like surveillance cameras tracking her every move. From now on, she would live with Lucien as his wife, no slips, no stumbles, no forgetting a single detail Celeste had ever shared about herself. And yet, the moment she stepped into the Drake estate, everything began to unravel. It didn't feel like a home, it felt like a gallery curated by a blind architect. Flawless but lifeless. The lights were dim, the doors glided open on their own, the flowers were fresh but scentless. The walls were lined with black and white photographs, not a single portrait. The butler bowed. "Congratulations, ma'am." Lucien gently placed a hand on her back, guiding her into the dining room. No words, no welcome toast, no celebration. Just the quiet overhead lights casting shadows across a long, endless dining table. 2 white porcelain plates. No flowers. No candles. No music. Lucien took his seat. Valeria sat across, hands resting lightly on her gown. Then he spoke, his voice soft as smoke but sharp as glass. "Your voice, it's different." She flinched. "Different how?" "Softer. Slower. A slight rasp at the end of your words." She didn't have that. Valeria steadied herself. "Maybe I'm just tired. It's been a long day." He nodded, then inhaled slowly, as if the air itself held secrets. "And the perfume? You're wearing a different one." She winced. "I forgot to put on the usual." Lucien nodded again, saying nothing this time, but the air between them thickened, like he was reading every molecule her words left behind. Dinner passed in silence. Valeria forced herself to eat, but the food tasted bitter. Lucien ate methodically, every motion rehearsed. When she tried to rise from her seat, his voice stopped her. "Do you remember our first phone call?" She froze. "What did we talk about?" he continued. "I told you about Paris. You told me about your cello." She pressed her lips together. She had no idea. That was Celeste, before she lost patience with what she called this old-school romantic nonsense. Valeria had only stepped in halfway through. "Oh right. I said I wanted to open a bookstore by the lake." Lucien tilted his head. "No. She never said that." Valeria froze in place. Lucien set down his fork, his fingers brushing his napkin like the final note of a somber song. "It's fine," he said. "I have a very good memory. Sometimes so good it makes people uncomfortable." She didn't answer, just stared into her water glass, wishing it was something stronger. She hadn't expected the blind man to see so clearly. That night, she entered the bedroom, wide, cold, immaculate. But no room for emotion. The space between the 2 pillows felt endless. Lucien lay on his side, turned away. Valeria lay on the edge of the bed, afraid to move. The wind slipped through the cracked window. She stared at the ceiling, tears falling silently. Then Lucien's voice came, quiet, not directed at her but piercing through every inch of space. "I don't need eyes to recognize a lie." Valeria didn't know who he meant, but that sentence, it struck something deep inside her. Maybe the scariest part isn't being found out. Maybe it's being understood so thoroughly, so intimately that there's nothing left to hide. So what do you think? Is Lucien suspicious or already certain? Is he waiting for Valeria to confess? Perhaps the answer isn't in what's said, but in the gaze of a man who never needed sight to see the truth. And you, would you keep playing the part, or take off the mask when the other person was never blind to begin with? She thought she'd be exposed, but the next morning, Lucien still treated her like his lawful wife. Valeria began to live in his world, a world of quiet, of precision without noise or chaos. And in that silence, something unexpected began to happen. She started to want to stay. She used to think the silence in this house was the worst part, but then she realized maybe it was her presence that was changing things, little by little. She woke earlier, went into the kitchen to make breakfast the way she'd learned he liked it, from tips the assistant had whispered to her. She stopped calling for the staff. She cleaned and rearranged his study, a room left untouched, sealed in silence since the accident. Lucien didn't ask anything. He simply touched the edge of the desk, the bookshelf, the pen holder, and said nothing. But that night, he asked quietly, "She never stepped into this room." Valeria's breath caught for a beat. She knew who she was. Celeste. "I know," she said. "I just wanted to make it a little more comfortable for you." Lucien didn't respond, but his fingers curled tightly around the wooden armrest. That afternoon, they walked together in the garden for the first time. Lucien let her lead him without his cane. The breeze was gentle. She described the flowers slowly, purple lavender, white daisies, hydrangeas beginning to wilt. He didn't interrupt, but then asked, "You don't tell me about orchids anymore." She froze. That had been Celeste. Celeste had once spoken to him about orchids, not her. "I thought maybe today the other flowers deserved to speak," she whispered. Lucien smiled for the first time, but it wasn't a peaceful smile. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they realize they're speaking to a different soul. Night fell. A soft amber glow filled the living room. Only the wind through the windows and the soft creak of wood remained. Valeria sat and read to him, not Shakespeare or Bronte like Celeste once had, but a gentle, quiet novel. Lucien didn't comment, but he tilted his head, his breathing deepening. "Your voice," he said after she stopped reading. "It's warmer. The way you touch me is softer. Even your silence feels different." Valeria put the book down, her hands tightening on the armrest. He turned his face toward her, blind eyes yet unflinchingly direct. "If you're someone else," he paused, "I think I might like you more." She didn't respond. Her heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to believe it was a confession, but maybe it was a quiet unveiling, a gentle way of saying, "I know." And in that long, tender silence, something began to stir, a little care, a little fear, a flicker of something unnamed between two people bound in a strange marriage, one who couldn't see and one who had never been truly seen. That morning, Valeria sat alone in the old study. She had just finished cleaning. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, glinting off picture frames that held no photos. She didn't know why she was there. Maybe because it was the one place no one ever entered. Maybe because, for the first time, she wanted to just be herself, even if only for a few stolen minutes. The door burst open, no knock, no warning. Celeste walked in like the house belonged to her. Behind her came their mother, heels striking the floor like a ticking death sentence. "We need to talk," her mother said. Valeria sat up straight, trying to stay calm. "About what?" Celeste didn't answer. She strolled around the room, fingers grazing the wooden desk before picking up a book, then tossed it back with a sharp, cutting thud. "The thing is, you're getting a little too deep into character." Valeria stayed silent. "The maids say you make breakfast for Lucien, take him on walks, sit by his bed reading every night." Celeste let out a mocking laugh, shaking her head. "Seriously, Val, dial it back. Did you forget who you're supposed to be pretending to be?" Their mother cut in, her voice slow and venomous. "You really think he's going to marry you again? He belongs to Celeste, to this family, not to you." Valeria looked up, meeting their eyes for the first time. She wasn't angry, but something softened quietly in her gaze. "He's not who you think he is," she said. Celeste laughed, loud and cruel. "Not who we think he is? What, not some blind fool easy to manipulate? Valeria clenched the edge of her chair. He's kind. He's perceptive. He deserves to be treated with decency, no matter who loves him. The room fell into a rare moment of silence. Their mother raised an eyebrow, looking at her like she was a child who had just spoken a fantasy aloud. You really think he cares about you? Her voice turned to ice. You're a placeholder, Valeria. He doesn't know who you are. He loves Celeste. And if he finds out the truth, what do you think he'll do? Celeste added, twisting the knife. You think he'll forgive the woman who impersonated someone else, or spit in your face for lying next to him under my name? Valeria pressed her lips together, but this time her eyes didn't well up. She stood, faced them both. If he finds out and he chooses to walk away, I'll still know I did the right thing, because at least I never treated him like a transaction. The two women froze, just for a moment. Then her mother spoke like casting a curse, don't fool yourself into thinking this is love. You're borrowing a place that was never yours, and when I take it back, you won't have the right to cry. The door slammed behind them. Valeria stood still. She had never fought back like that before. But the strangest part was, this time she wasn't afraid. All that remained now was a single question: if Lucien knew everything, would he see her as a betrayer or the only one who ever treated him with honesty? When the door closed behind her mother and Celeste, Valeria didn't cry. She didn't scream. But something inside her cracked, not a shattering quake but a slow, quiet fracture, like someone carving away at the last layers of trust she had left. She left the room and wandered down the long hallway to the back veranda. Sunset was fading. The final light of day slanted through the sheer curtains, painting the garden in a pale orange hue, delicate, fleeting, like her. Valeria sat at the edge of the porch where the sun's last rays were slipping beneath the trees swaying in the wind. She hugged her knees to her chest as if they were the only thing keeping her from falling into the endless black void inside her. Her mother's voice still echoed in her ears, Celeste's laugh folded into it like a cruel whisper in a locked basement. You're just a second-rate copy. You don't get to love. She hadn't fought back as much as she'd wanted. She'd only managed one sentence: he's a good man. And somehow, that was enough to make her mother laugh, as if she just heard a cheap, ridiculous joke. Valeria buried her head in her arms. Her tears no longer fell in waves, they came one by one, heavy and slow, like her heart wasn't beating anymore, just bleeding. Behind her, there was the faintest sound. She didn't need to turn around. Lucien. He sat down beside her, no questions, no words, just silence. But it wasn't empty. It was thick, weighty, full of everything neither of them could yet say. After a long moment, his voice came, low and steady. Have you ever wished you were someone else? Valeria looked up. The question pierced straight through her ribs. Yes, she whispered. Every day. Lucien nodded slightly, without judgment. Then he leaned in, his hand reaching out to touch hers, not to hold, just to touch, like he needed to make sure she was still there. If one day I get to see you, he paused, as if tasting the weight of his words, I'm afraid I won't want to look away. Valeria turned toward him, aching to meet his gaze, even though she knew it wouldn't matter. He couldn't see her, and yet in that exact moment, she felt more seen than never before. She tried to say something, but her throat burned, her heartbeat stumbled, her words dissolved into breath. Lucien didn't wait for a response. He pulled his hand back, stood slowly. The breeze tousled his hair across his forehead. You know, he stopped, his back to her, there are some things you can only see more without your eyes. Then he walked away, leaving Valeria alone with the last trace of sunlight and a heart beginning to tremble with something that felt dangerously close to breaking free. Lucien didn't go back inside right away. He stood beneath the awning for a while, his back still turned, as if weighing something, whether to speak or carry the thought with him forever. At last, he spoke quietly, slowly, but enough to stop Valeria's breath. Tomorrow, I'm going to the hospital. She looked up, startled. He turned slightly, not quite facing her, but his voice was bare, without armor. There's a doctor in Switzerland. An experimental procedure. They say the odds aren't great, but there's hope. Valeria opened her mouth, but no words came, no blessing, no protest, because anything she said now would cut both ways. Lucien bowed his head, his hands buried in his coat pockets. You know what scares me most, he said, his tone soft with something deeper than fear. It's not that it might not work. He paused, then gave a faint, almost bitter smile. It's that I might open my eyes and no longer recognize the world I used to think was beautiful, because it turns out it wasn't what I imagined. Then he walked into the dark, leaving Valeria frozen on the porch. The wind crept across her shoulders, cold and sharp, whispering one quiet, devastating question: if he sees tomorrow, will he ever want to look at her again? Time after the surgery passed as slowly as pages in a book no one was turning. Valeria didn't ask much. Lucien didn't offer. She remained by his side every day like part of the house itself. She smiled less, stayed silent more, because the closer they got to the day he might see again, the more terrified she became of what that would mean. And then that morning came, a morning touched by soft sunlight, birds chirping at the window, and a pair of eyes about to open after 2 years of darkness. The sky was unusually clear, as if it too held its breath, waiting for something monumental to unfold. The recovery room glowed white, quiet with machines humming in the background like a soft warning. No one spoke loudly. No one rushed. The air was compressed like the hush before a storm. Valeria sat beside the bed, hands clasped in her lap, cold and tight. Today, the doctor would remove Lucien's bandages, the eyes she had once touched with trembling fingers, the eyes she once wished could see her first. But now, that wish made it hard to breathe. No Celeste makeup, no Dior perfume, no silk dress. Just Valeria, plain, bare, real, a woman sitting on the edge of truth, about to lose everything she never meant to love. Lucien lay still. The final layers of gauze were removed. He kept his eyes closed a moment longer, then blinked, as if testing a part of himself that had long been asleep. And then he opened them. Light poured in, fierce, immediate, but he didn't flinch. His gaze swept across the room, then stopped. Directly in front of him was her. Valeria froze, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't blink. Her heart thudded wildly, her chest ached from the weight of a hope she dared not hold. Lucien looked at her. He didn't squint. He didn't recoil. He didn't turn away. He simply looked, like he had expected to see her, not with surprise but recognition. Valeria opened her mouth, but no sound came, only her eyes full of something between fear and love. You're not Celeste, Lucien said, his voice quiet, measured, like a verdict that had long been deliberated. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, but for Valeria, it landed like a blow, not to her face but to the last fragile pieces of whatever self-protection she had left. She flinched, stepping back half a pace, hands clenched, lips trembling. Any excuse, any explanation suddenly felt hollow. But Lucien didn't stop. He sat up, eyes never leaving hers. I've known for a long time. From your voice. From the way you set the tea on the left instead of the right. From how you say, I'm sorry, like no one's ever forgiven you before. Valeria wept, no longer quiet tears. She collapsed into herself, covering her face like a child. Her whole body shook, not from shame but from the fear that maybe, even after everything, she wasn't worthy of being loved. Why, she choked out, her voice breaking like wet paper. Why didn't you say something sooner? Why did you let me keep lying to you? Lucien walked toward her, every step closing the distance between them and toward the truth they'd both been afraid of. He stopped, stood before her, lowered himself, and gently touched her face, wiping away the bitter tears. Because I was waiting, he said, to see if you could love me as a man and not just as the final role in your family's game. Valeria looked up. Her eyes met his, eyes newly born into light, still adjusting, still blurred, but warmer than the first sun of spring. Lucian took a breath and, for the first time, he said her real name. Valeria. He didn't say it with anger. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth, a name stripped of disguise, a word never spoken aloud now made sacred by the way it left his lips. Valeria broke again, but this time she didn't hide her face. She let it happen. Let him see. Lucien whispered, I didn't love you because you reminded me of someone. I loved you because you dared to be different, because you loved me when I had nothing left to offer but blindness and loneliness. He pulled her into an embrace, light as thread but tight enough to wrap around a heart just starting to heal. At the doorway, Celeste appeared, silent, still, watching everything she could no longer change. Lucian didn't look at her. He only murmured, perhaps to himself, I was blind, but in the dark, I saw you most clearly. And Valeria, for the first time in her life, didn't need to be anyone else to be loved. And you? If you were Lucian, would you forgive or walk away? If you were Valeria, would you dare to live with your heart fully exposed? This story isn't just about love, it's about choosing between truth and comfort. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you want more stories that make your heart tremble just a little, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because who knows? The next story might be yours. After the day Lucien opened his eyes, nothing changed in the loud, dramatic way Valeria had imagined. There was no shouting, no grand exit, no announcement of endings, only silence. A heavy, careful kind of silence, like the two of them were walking across thin ice beneath which lived all the things they hadn't yet dared to name. Lucien didn't push her away, but he didn't pull her closer either. He remained polite, gentle, just as he always had, except now his eyes could see, and that, more than anything, terrified Valeria. She felt seen but also more exposed than ever before. For a full week, they lived under the same roof like strangers who had once loved each other in another life. They avoided sitting at the same table, avoided walking in the garden at the same time, avoided brushing shoulders when passing in narrow hallways. But avoidance doesn't last forever. That afternoon, the sky was overcast. The back garden smelled of herbs drying, the season beginning to shift. Valeria sat on an iron chair beside the wilted lavender. Lucian came outside slowly, without intent, but still stopped in front of her. They sat across from each other like participants in a quiet meeting where both knew this might be the final page. Valeria kept her gaze low. Her voice was hoarse, not from tears but from everything she'd never spoken aloud. I didn't come for you, Lucien, she began. I came because of a promise, a phone call I couldn't turn away from. Lucien didn't react, but his hands tightened slightly in his lap, as if even now it still hurt. Valeria continued, this time daring to meet his eyes, those eyes now filled with light yet carrying something remarkably close to sadness. But I stayed, not for the promise. I stayed for you. For the nights I read to you. For the moments I wiped your forehead. For every small touch I was too afraid to let you know was real. Lucien closed his eyes, then opened them again. He didn't cry, but something had softened in him. He spoke slowly, his voice lower than usual. You were the only one who didn't try to control me when I couldn't see. You didn't give me orders. You didn't tell me how to live. You just sat with me and listened. That sentence stopped Valeria in her breath. She wanted to speak but only shook her head instead. I don't need your forgiveness, she whispered. I only need you to see me as me. Lucien didn't reply right away. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was reading every layer of emotion on her face. Then he stood, not hurriedly but like something had finally settled in him after days of silence. He reached out his hand. If you're still here tomorrow morning. Valeria looked up. Her hand trembled. Then stay. Not because I need you, but because I want to start over with you. He paused, his eyes catching what little light was left in the sky. For the first time, without pretending to be anyone else. Valeria raised her hand to her mouth, as if to steady something breaking open inside her. She didn't nod. She didn't cry. But in her eyes, something had been returned to her, a sense of worth, a flicker of hope, a quiet, rightful place in someone's heart without having to trade away who she was to earn it. 1 year later, in the mountains of Oregon, where the morning mist blankets the pine forests and sunlight visits like an old, gentle friend, there's a small center tucked beside a clear, still lake. On its simple wooden sign, hand-carved words read, "The Touch of Light." Lucien and Valeria live there. They don't call it hiding, they call it rebirth. Each morning, Valeria guides blind students around the lake, teaching them to sense their path through sound, scent, and the rhythm of their own hearts. Lucien teaches music, something he once dismissed as meaningless. Now he teaches through sight, through touch, and with a voice more tender than it's ever been. No one here calls him a millionaire. They call him, the man who could see in the dark. And Valeria? No one calls her by the wrong name anymore. At the same time, in a luxurious villa in Florida, Celeste is now married to a young senator, handsome, ambitious, with a bright political future. But 4 months ago, a car accident took the sight from both his eyes. Now, each morning, Celeste brews his tea, chooses his shirts with help from a fashion assistant, and learns how to describe a sunset to someone who will never see one. That blind man, sweet, trusting, calls her the light of his life. Every time he says it, Celeste smiles, but no one knows that her smile always ends in the faintest curl of her lip, followed by a silence as long as memory. One morning, while sitting at her vanity applying a touch of red lipstick out of old habit, her assistant's voice came through the Bluetooth speaker. In today's headlines, entrepreneur Lucien Drake has been awarded the International Humanitarian Award for his work with the blind community, alongside his wife, Valeria Quinn. Celeste's hand froze. The lipstick trembled in her palm. A second later, she laughed quietly, not bitter, not sharp, just dry, brief, like something inside her had fallen into the deepest part of herself. She set the lipstick down, poured the tea for her husband, and as she placed the cup in his hands, she leaned in close and whispered, soft enough for the wind to carry away, but never soft enough for a heart to forget, "I'm not the light, my love. I'm just the shadow who stood in the wrong place." Love does not punish, but it never forgets. And in the end, the ones who love truthfully will see, the ones who pretend will perform forever, until there's no audience left to believe them. Thank you for walking this journey with Valeria and Lucien to the very end. If this story touched something in your heart, leave a comment or simply share it to let this light travel further. And if you'd like to follow more stories that just might make your heart break beautifully, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because who knows? The next story might be yours.